Hello everyone, and welcome to After Alexander. Episode 80, The Downfall of Achaeus. As you might be able to predict from the title of today's episode, things are not going to go well for Achaeus. That said, let's see exactly how the wheels come off the proverbial wagon. To do this, we need to swing over our viewpoint to talk about Egypt for a bit. Shortly after Sardis was entered, the Egyptian Prime Minister Sosibius and a mercenary called Bolus were talking. Bolus is mentioned by Polybius as being a man widely recognized for his intelligence and military talents, and he had, for quite some time, been prominent in the Egyptian court. Sosibius basically promised the world if Bolus could only extract Achaeus from Sardis. After all, as we've discussed in the past, Egypt was allied to the Achaean side. Bolus took a few days to mull this offer over, but he accepted. Bolus relayed a story to Sosibius in which a commander of the Seleucus Cretan forces, called Cambyllus, was a close friend of his. Bolus was given money and letters which would get him in touch with a certain Nicomachus over in Rhodes and an Ephesus man called Melancomas. These two had been helpful to Achaeus in the past, and Nicomachus was almost a father figure of sorts. So, with these two helpful contacts, and the knowledge that he probably had a friend in the Cretan forces commander Cambyllus, Bolus set off. He landed at Rhodes before carrying on to Ephesus. Here, he cozied up to the two respective Achaeans and arranged to send a message to Cambyllus that he'd arrived on a recruitment drive for Ptolemy IV. He also intimated that he wanted to talk with Cambyllus in private. Now, Cambyllus was ready to listen, and agreed to meet Bolus at the time and place of his choosing. When night fell, the two eventually met under the citadel of Sardis. They bonded over their shared Cretan heritage, and the impression is that their employment on opposite sides was transitory by comparison. I have to say, I do like the image of these two Cretans bonding together under the starry night sky as they talk about their respective employers. Anyway, as you might be able to predict, whether they would cooperate was not an open question. However, the issue now came up of which side they would choose. In the end, the money given by Sosibius was shared, and it was decided they would offer Achaeus up to Antiochus. Ptolemy IV would probably have lambasted Sosibius at this point, telling him never trust a mercenary. Or maybe not, who's to say. The plan was that Bolus would start talks with Achaeus while Cambyllus went to King Antiochus. They would lure him out and capture him. Cambyllus told all to Antiochus, who was initially doubtful, suspecting treachery. I suppose some things just sound like too good of an offer to be true. Once he probed the plan and it stood up to scrutiny, he decided that the reward of capturing Achaeus was too great to pass up on, and he accepted, stressing that he wanted Achaeus caught alive. Meanwhile, Bolus travelled to Ephesus, and the three plotters were elated that Cambyllus was on their side. A messenger called Arianus was given letters which Achaeus would trust, telling him to trust both Cambyllus and Bolus. Incidentally, Arianus wasn't told what was really going on, instead believing that he was working to get Achaeus out. From a plotting perspective, I can see the logic of this. Better to keep as many people as possible in the dark to minimize the risk of the plan being leaked. Achaeus, like his cousin, was initially suspicious, but the prospect of freedom won out. His plan was to get out and rush for Syria, getting it to rebel. He hoped that Hollow Syria, Phoenicia, and even Antioch herself could be induced to join him. Achaeus told Bolus to show up on a particular night without a moon, and he would follow them. Now, the plotters were worried that Achaeus might show up with an armed following. If he didn't, they reasoned, there wouldn't be an issue. However, if he did, they would be led down a mountain pass, and, at the spot where Cambyses was waiting with a force, Bolus would throw himself on Achaeus to stop him slipping away or throwing himself off the side. At sunrise on the day in question, they met with Achaeus for a final conversation. Achaeus became worried and tried to be crafty. He said that he couldn't make it on the specified hour, so he would send 3 or 4 friends who should follow Bolus and co, and he would follow himself after. Presumably, he was hoping that if Bolus was a traitor, the bad news would fall on his unlucky friends. When night fell, he told his wife Laodike that... Oh wait, cancel the bit about his unlucky friends, by the way. When night fell, he told his wife Laodike that he was leaving. She was described by Bevan as collapsing from grief, with Achaeus needing to soothe her, and you can see why. However, this wouldn't stop Achaeus departing. Now, you might be wondering, why is Achaeus leaving? I thought there were a few followers going on ahead. Well, there were. However, there weren't 4 followers, there were 5. One of them presumably radiating an aura of "I'm definitely the king" while looking around and trying to look as innocuous as possible. All 5 of these men were wearing the same clothing when they emerged from the citadel. Bolus was caught out here, having no idea whether Achaeus was even in the group to begin with. Added to the identical clothing, the dark made it hard to work out facial features. On Achaeus' side, he needed to keep Bolus caught out until he got somewhere safe. However, his own men gave the game away. When they came upon sections of the path that were dangerous, they, without thinking, moved to protect their monarch, who was, from the perspective of Bolus, one of the 5 individuals. For his part, Bolus, walking behind with the messenger in front of the gathering, noticed this unusual behaviour, and realised what it obviously was. So, when they got to where Cambyses was waiting, the trap was sprung. At a whistle from Bolus, Cambyses and his waiting men leapt forwards, while Bolus leapt on Achaeus to stop him moving. Achaeus was caught. We now swing the camera over to the Seleucid camp. Antiochus III had been fretting in his tent. His thoughts were interrupted by Cambyses bundling someone in and throwing him trussed and bound onto the floor. Fairly obviously, this was the captured Achaeus. Antiochus was silent for a long time, before breaking down in tears. When sun rose the next morning, Antiochus passed judgment on the rebel Achaeus. He suffered mutilation and then decapitation. His severed head was sewn into a donkey's hide, while the body was crucified. So that's the end of Achaeus, and it's a pretty brutal end at that. Moving back over to Sardis, the only one who knew Achaeus had gone was his wife Laodike. She heard the victorious cacophony in the Seleucid camp and knew that the ploy had failed and the worst had happened. At any length, the arrival of a Seleucid announcement that Achaeus was dead and she should leave Sardis did the job if nothing else would have done. Sardis collectively grieved, but held out. Laodike clung on to the rebellion, but its days were numbered. The inhabitants of the city fell into factional infighting, with the commander Aribazes no longer obeying the rebel queen Laodike. This factionalism benefited the Seleucids no end. In 213 BCE, the factions fell over themselves to be the first ones to surrender to the Seleucid king. Sardis was, finally, back in Seleucid hands. Polybius actually gives us some moral lessons to take away from this rebellion. The first is that one should not be too trusting, a sentiment which is also present in the modern book, The 48 Laws of Power. You can almost imagine Polybius wagging his finger reproachingly at Achaeus as he wandered down the mountainside accompanied by Bolus and Arrianus. The second moral is that, when things are going our way, we should not be too proud. Instead, we should be ready for the wheel of fortune to turn once again. With the fall of Achaeus, we reach the end of today's episode. As always, thank you for listening. Feel free to get in touch with the show's email address for any questions, comments, or topic suggestions for future Tangent episodes. Until next time, have a great week, everyone.